starts at 7 o'clock. We'd love to have the public there and anyone else that's interested. We had a fantastic discussion at the first one, a lot of great information about what we're doing as a county in response to the opioid epidemic, the current programs we have, and then having a broader discussion on, you know, what else is out there that's a option that we could look at. So you'd love your attendance at that. Again, that will be tomorrow at 7. With that, we'll go ahead and work on building our agenda. All items will be considered moved to consent unless held for further discussion. On our consent agenda, there are currently 13 items. Of those 13, were there any questions?
No, just real quick. They said that the video feed isn't working, or should be working now. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I just am a little offended that we have a wedding that needs law enforcement and none of us got invited. I mean, that sounds like a good party.
These are good
Number
parties.
11.
Did you have any questions
No,
on that?
I don't.
Okay.
No.
Nope. Okay. Moving to our regular agenda, I have items number 2, 4, 6, needing held for further discussion. Are there any others?
Number 3.
3? Any additionals? Okay. So with that, we will go ahead and look to regular agenda item number 2. This is to look at adopting a resolution establishing the 2018 tax rate levies for Utah County. All right, Mr. Harvey, will you go ahead and kind of introduce this for us?
Okay. Well, it's that time of year when, as we're preparing to send out valuation notices and start the tax collection process and Board of Equalization process, that we adopt our certified tax rate is calculated by the State Tax Commission. The rates this year were calculated at, for the county overall rate, .000734, and for county local assessing collecting 000913. The 5 other rates that the county adopts, one of those is a pass-through rate, which is the multi-county assessing collecting rate, which was .5009. Service area 6 is .001236. Service area 7 is .000589. Service area 8 is 000276. These, of course, all fractional percentages. Service area 9, which is 000127, and then Soldier Summit Special Service District, which is 003046. These, of course, the rates will generate property tax revenue for the county. As I mentioned, the multi-county assessing collecting rate is a pass-through amount that we collect at the county level, but that is passed on to the State Tax Commission, which funds the statewide assessing collecting, which all counties collect. Overall, the rates have, because growth and values continue to rise in Utah County, the rate has again decreased over last year. So overall, our rates keep going down as the values keep going up. So that's generally a good thing. I don't know, is there any members of the commission have any questions about the rate or any of the rate detail?
So I did have a question on this particular one. So this would apply for 2018.
Yeah, this is the rate we're adopting to for the property tax that we're collecting for 2018, which was part of our 2018 budget process. So because we're a calendar year entity, the property taxes we collect at the end of the year are part of the budget the current budget year that we're in. So as a calendar year entity, as a matter of course, unlike say cities or school districts, they're right now doing what's known as in cases if they're trying to adopt a higher rate, doing a truth in taxation. The county, we do that process in November when we set our budget. So for 2018, our only option, because we didn't go through truth in taxation, would be to adopt the certified rates as calculated or adopt a lower rate. We can, of course, as I like to tell cities, take all the less we want. We just can't take any more at this point. So if, like, for example, the county wanted to consider doing a truth in taxation, we would have to do that as part of our 2019 budget process and go through the procedures to do that this fall. So that's just as a matter of course, and that's for all calendar year entities, counties and water districts and other certain special service districts. They're on the the calendar year fiscal year.
Right, so just to explain to people in simplified terms for what that means in their mailbox.
Sorry.
What Bert is saying is, the estimated notices that everybody got already, this is in essence,
Well,
the
they're-
adoption of that. If the county were to ever raise taxes, we do
Right.
that in October. Your next estimate, after you've paid your taxes in January, February, whenever we mail those out, I can't remember, would reflect that. So
Right.
it's locked in for this year is what he's saying.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And the valuation notices will go out in July, and the tax notices go out in October, so, yeah, that's when everyone will be hitting everyone's mailbox.
Okay. Any additional questions?
No, I'm satisfied with it.
Okay, I'd entertain a motion.
Move that we adopt the resolution establishing the 2018 tax rate levies as stated number 2.
Second?
I have a motion and a second to adopt regular agenda item number 2. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that will carry 3-0. Thank you. Next on our agenda, we have regular agenda item number 3. This is looking at some changes to our purchasing card policies. And we'll invite Robert Baxter to come forward and introduce some of these basic changes, and I know there are some questions on this.
All right. So in general, what I was looking at here was to tighten up a couple of things and loosen up a couple of things. The idea being that we want to be able to take advantage of using the purchasing card as much as possible so that the county can get the rebate that we get by using the purchasing card. But at the same time, we don't want the card to be used to circumvent our procurement rules and procedures. So I made a couple of changes here. One of the changes to tighten things up a little bit was to require, with the purchasing card, as sort of an exception to our normal purchasing rules, and that they're able to make the purchase prior to creating a requisition. Normally, you need to produce a requisition before making a purchase, because these are micro purchases, and we've made the determination that that's okay. But I'm adding in here that any purchase over $2,500 would require a purchase order in advance, which admittedly would be fairly rare anyway, because most of the cards have limits that are well below $2,500. But even so, that's just to try to prevent circumventing the purchasing rules. Because if it's over $2,500, there should either be a contract in place, or they should be getting competitive quotes. We just want to make sure that's being done. And then there are a couple of things I wanted to loosen up a little bit. There's a list of unauthorized uses. Most of those are going to stay there, but there were a couple of them that I wanted to change to make that they could only be used with prior purchasing agent approval. There again, so we're not tying our hands and not being able to use the purchasing card in cases where we might be able to. For example, for professional services. We do want to make sure that if the purchasing card is going to be used for that it has been properly vetted. If there's a contract in place, or at least that we make the determination that it doesn't need a contract, but they don't just automatically charge professional services to the card. But I feel like if they need to get my prior approval to do that, then that would satisfy that.
So I actually would like to talk to you about that list just for a second, because above them, the 5, I don't have a problem with 4 and 5. I understand why we want to use the UMB card, because it carries an insurance and things like that. But I have traveled when that hasn't worked at times, and so my question is, would it be beneficial? And on number 5, I can think of a few experiences where in the sheriff's department we've had to purchase some replacement that, quite honestly, after waiting a month for IT to come through, it just because of things. My question is would it be beneficial for 4 and 5 to go through you in those rare instances that would be required, rather than an absolute no?
You're talking about for travel expenses and for IT
in case the
equipment.
UMB card wouldn't work, they reach out to you. I mean, they can always reach out to you and find out why it's not working either, but in case it doesn't, you then authorize the use of their P card. And or for number 5, for example, what I'm talking about is if deputies are out there using iPads for crime scene collection or whatever and it breaks, it's not advantageous to wait 5, 6 weeks to replace some of these when it's something that, you know, they have budget for identified if going through you in those cases. So in those are both real experiences that we've experienced in the last couple of years.
I mean, both the travel policy and the IT policy are not policies that are mine.
No, I understand.
So, personally, it wouldn't be a problem for me, but like I say, they're not my policy, so I'm not sure if others would have an issue with that.
Mr. Chairman, just a comment and a thought along what Commissioner Graves is saying. If we have situations where we have certain equipment that breaks down, we need to replace it in a timely manner, we do always want to make sure there's uniformity in the equipment and stuff we have, and Neil would probably, as our IT manager, need to speak to this, but maybe the suggestion is we have a safety stock so that when something breaks, it can instantly be put out there, and then we don't put the officers or others in need of something, and then we maintain the consistency, and we're buying things in bulk and at the discounts that IT can get. So that's a thought on how to approach that.
Well, and that's why I say if we give the approach where Robert is able to review that in that rare case that it makes sense, following under those guidelines, rather than if we always say no every time. I mean, absolutes, we always find that there's a later exception, and I guess we can always address it at that time, but that's why I just wondered if it would be prudent to possibly move those where it's his, you know, again, because I agree with you.
Yeah, I'm just suggesting where you gave that example, that is one option that could be followed.
Anyway, just a food for thought.
And that is an example of what I'm trying to get at here is that, you know, the way it was written before, we had things that just are absolute no, that, you know, the only way to get around it would be to bring it to the commission and, you know, wait 2 weeks and get, you know, approval, and we had no other alternative. And if there are others where it makes sense to allow the option to make an exception, I'm willing to consider that as well.
I guess maybe question for me is not to slow this process up, but maybe what we'll want to do is have Tad or somebody in the auditor's office go back and look at P cards, how many of those maybe items we've bought and the circumstances in it. So maybe, you know, at that point, maybe it is nothing to be concerned about, or maybe it is.
In my experience, from what I've seen, usually when those things happen, it's because of poor planning, and not a true emergency. But.
And Robert, thank you. I spent quite a bit of time with you yesterday, so I think you know just about every question I'm going to ask now. If you want to look at, commissioners, if you want to get on the P card, the policy that's in place, or that they're proposing, the resolution, I'm just going to walk down through
The resolution or the 10-page?
The resolution. I don't know. Let's have, I've got at least 10 pages.
Yeah.
pages.
Okay.
The actual proceeding.
Second paragraph on here, and maybe I'll start with this. All of us work through purchase orders and requisitions and travel. We see that on ours. And then we also have a tab that says, you know, questioned or denied. And in that column, I have more P card issues than any other. They're just on there constantly. Part of the problem, when I saw this come up, I understand loosening things up for efficiencies, but sometimes when we loosen things up for efficiencies, we step on ourselves when it comes to what the policy is, to the point to where we have exceptions, and then why do we have a policy if we have all these exceptions, you know, to the policy? And in essence, the policy and the change of policy should come to the commission for a change. And so I have a little, and so through those lenses is how I read this, with knowing that I have all these concerns on P cards and the problems with P cards, purchase cards. So P card is a purchase card, is that once it's swiped, it's gone. And in essence, the money's gone, and then the process can get thwarted. And in essence, too, we have some that are sitting on our docket right now, and you looked at them because I had you come down and look at them. They're a year old or more, and 2 commissioners didn't sign off, but no one cares because the money's gone. And so that's problematic to me as I look at those. There are some in which, you know, we didn't have contracts, but it was swiped and gone. So the tightening up is great and trying to find it, but I think for overall for the commission, there's got to be a way that we look at this. I don't want to have all those on there all the time, and I'm always trying to question them and where they're at and not getting answers to them, because no one cares if you answer or not, because eventually, I mean, it's gone anyway. It doesn't hit the budget. No one cares about them. So start at the beginning, and I know that's a kind of a sharp tone with it, but it says in the second paragraph, the last sentence, it says the county will only reimburse employees who use personal funds to pay for legitimate county expenses when the department head provides written approval of the purchases. And I asked the question, written approval? Where's this form? Where do we have this process? It doesn't exist. We have it in a policy, it doesn't exist. That's a concern to me.
Well, even with that whole sentence, the fact that we're talking about reimbursing, but the reality is that's not part of a P card. We're talking about reimbursing, not with a P card. So I don't know why it's in our P card policy anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's a strange sentence in there that we don't have any, going
And
down
actually,
to.
that's a good point, because that's not a P card.
Yeah, we're talking about
Yeah,
you expend your
exclusive
personal
policy.
funds.
That's just yeah.
Right, right. So going down to number 3 under custody of the purchase card, it has in the, if you're looking at, it's the highlighted portion. It says that the custodian may designate another employee to create purchase orders and obtain proper documentation before the purchase is submitted for payment. And the custodian is the individual that's been trained, according to up above, on how to use this process. But ultimately, the department head is responsible for the budgets. And so I just suggest that we change that language to department head instead of the custodian. Custodian being the one that says, okay, I can designate somebody else on behalf of this when it's a department head function.
Just a clarification, is custodian, I think the word custodian's in there, and I may be wrong, because when you fill out the application for the P card, isn't that the term used by the bank, the custodian of the card? Or did we just come up with that? Because I'm okay with changing the department head.
Well, the custodian is the one who has, responsibility for that particular card. And by designate here, I don't know if maybe allow would be a better word to use, but the idea being that, a lot of times one office will have a purchasing card. That doesn't mean that only the custodian can go out to, Home Depot and use it. That they have a sign-out sheet and somebody else will go use it. And that's really what that's getting at, is that it is allowed for others to, within that office, to check out the card and use the card, but there is a process in place for that. They need to sign a log, and the custodian needs to be aware of who's using the card and keeping track of it.
Yeah, and that's why I go back to department head. I mean, the department head's ultimately responsible for the budgeting and the finances and the purposes there. And if you have one person, say, come up and say, I want to check the card out, the custodian says, great, go ahead and spend it. And then it gets swiped, and then the department head's like, well, wait a second, I never even gave any directions for this. It becomes a little problem. For me, it becomes problematic. Next paragraph down, it says the purchase card is the property of Utah County and should be kept secure. That should be a must be kept secure. I don't know how we say, it should be kept secure. And these are little technical things. There's a number in there, a phone number in there. What if that number changes in the future? Here we have it written into our policy. And then also at the very end, talking about notification, it says, shall notify the purchasing agent, upon, after the card has been canceled, because the custodian shall notify. I think that we can change some words in there immediately, not give them a year or two on notifications. Going to the next page on sales tax, the highlighted version in here again. This is an exemption to the policy, and I think it should be out of the policy or modified. Anyway, it's a long little section there.
I mean the whole section.
I think that should be modified because it's an exemption to what's going on. We should at least look at it, because it does, put some responsibility on the clerk auditor's office. I don't know if he necessarily wants to take that responsibility, but, you know, that was highlighted in there as it's gonna go in a certain direction there. So I'm worried about that one.
Well, the purpose of that, again, was to, I mean, there are some cases when it's a small enough amount that it's really not worth the county resources to go back and retrieve, $2.19. And then that would be left up to the discretion of the clerk auditor to decide, are we going to go ahead and allow that? Or if he sees a pattern of negligence, basically, to make the employee accountable for that. I know if it's a larger amount, then that's a different story. But
So my question is on that. It was my understanding, and this would be enlightening to me to learn this, because I've always thought this, that if we are, as an entity, charged the sales tax at the end of the year, we can send that total back into the state for reimbursement. Is that not true?
There are some cases where we can, but it becomes very,
Oh, sure, because you're adding up 10 cents here and $2 here, but.
and, the first line of defense is for individuals to just
Correct.
mention that we're tax exempt. And I can't remember, remind me, Robert, does our P card have our tax exempt number on it?
no.
I know
but-
our UMB card does, but.
Yeah,
I
but
couldn't
some of
remember.
us have put a sticker on it to make sure. But
Yeah.
see, the problem comes in organizations, and this is the one this is why this becomes troublesome. You have entities like Walmart, and they're not the only one, but that create their own
Internal
number.
policies, yes.
Yes, and so we go through as a county and we apply, but they create their own number. So an employee goes, because their department head says, go to Walmart and grab whatever, right, for supplies that's approved. And all of a sudden, they don't have the Walmart number because they take the sales tax ID number. That's the problem. Those are the situations that I see coming up, and it's like, how do we say who's negligent? Because we also don't want to let our number out all the time.
Yeah, let
then
me
you
just, real briefly, currently, we have a form, or it's brought to my attention, and then I sit down with one of our two accounts payable people, McLeana or Tad, and we review them, and then I sign off on these smaller amounts, because it isn't, it doesn't make that much sense to use all the time on the small amounts. But also by them passing through our office like that, if I see a pattern,
Sure.
then we will alert the departments. And for the most part, it's just here and there. But we do come across things where we do have a situation, Robert and I talked about this recently, we will have individuals that will go purchase it on their own card or their own Amazon Prime account, which isn't given tax exempt status. Then they come back and seek reimbursement by the county for that. And they, of course, want reimbursement for the taxes too. And that puts us in a situation where really they should have used the card so we get the tax exempt status that comes with our Amazon.
Well, yeah, see, there's another
Prime
problem with
account.
that, because if the county employees are using their own card and achieving air miles and stuff like that, that becomes problematic as well.
Yeah. So
Because-
really, the default should always be to use the county resources wherever possible.
Right.
But it's situations like that, when it comes to sales taxes, and because they pass through us, we do discover that sometimes what's happening, and in that case, then it's a refresher or a reminder that they should use the card that way.
Well, and I come across cases, I mean, we'll spend literally, 3 or 4 hours total employee time to try to retrieve $2.19. That just doesn't seem like a good use of county resources. I mean, I think we should look at this from the perspective as what's in the best interest of the county. And if we do see
I
trend.
agree with the $2.50 stuff, but if we're starting to do capital improvement projects and professional services, that number could be a lot higher. And so that's where I get concerned. I mean, we can focus on either end of that. Number 5, it's just, there's just about halfway through there, it just designates the department. I think that should be the department head. I think you agreed with that one too, Robert, right?
Yep.
You want the sentence is, if the authorized
In the
credit-
first paragraph?
It's in the first paragraph, yeah, just department head. If the authorized credit limits become insufficient to meet departmental needs, an increase may be requested by, and it says the department, and you'd assume maybe that was the department head, but if that was requested by,
And the form they submit is signed by the department head.
Yeah, I think that
That
should
should
be
just
too,
be part of
because
our-
they're the overseers of their total budget anyway.
Going down to the last paragraph in the blue section, where it starts off and says, in some cases,
What number?
this is still on 5,
Okay.
still on 5 down there. It has the purchasing agent, I think that should be, and I don't think this will ever happen, but I think that should be purchasing agent or commission when it's talking about categories. I can't imagine a time really that they would come to us for that, but I think you kind of, we're fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, when this happens, I literally get a phone call from a vendor to say, hey, my car's declining, what's going on? And then I can go in and add the category to it. It's kind of an on-the-spot thing.
Yeah,
I can't imagine it would ever come to the commission, but.
right.
In fact, Mr. Chairman, just as a follow-up there, that has happened with our revenue crew at times, just because of the way some of those locations code things. And so they will contact us, and then I have the the authority to go ahead and add that vendor or merchant code so that it goes through. So that's essentially what Robert's talking about in this situation, is just exceptions like that.
Right. And the reason why I think sometimes, I mean, Robert works here quite often, but there might be a time that he's on vacation and there might be things that come up, and I think it's just, there's a little bit of a fail-safe in that too.
Well, I will say, when he was on vacation, he still answered his cell phone for me. Don't want to maybe tell everybody that, but.
On number 6, it says, starting off, says, you know, the card payment shall be made through the purchase order process. And again, this is looking through the lenses of, if this is our policy, you know, the exceptions to it. And then down a little bit on there, it talks about the 2,500 purchase orders must be approved before purchase is made, unless otherwise authorized by the purchasing agent. That's just a blanket, you know, unless authorized. There's no stipulations, there's nothing in there. It's just wide open. And I don't necessarily want to say, here's our policy. Wait, no, it's not really our policy. It depends on what Robert thinks his policy is. I don't know why we have a policy if we.
So I also have a problem with this, but a different spin. And this one has been a bugaboo since I came into office, because the whole civil division, when we worked on the policies, Paul Jones and I always debated. The question is on this, when you say purchase over 2,500, we've always had that debate on, is that $2,500 in totality for a year, or can we split this thing up $2,000 and then $2,000 and $2,000?
Oh,
And now
that
we're
never
circumventing
happens.
the process. I know.
No, it does.
So,
But that's in our existing purchasing rules now, that orders cannot be artificially split up to circumvent purchasing rules. But
so-
it's kind of a judgment call sometimes.
So what Commissioner Lee was alluding to, a lot of, earlier when he says in our system we see this, a lot of the flagged notes from the auditor tend to be in that direction, especially now by this time of year, because it's like, you know, they're looking at it saying, hey, we have spent $8 million in batteries. We don't. I'm just using that as an expense, but
There
we
is
buy them
no-
every day.
There is no cumulative total. There used to be, before my time, there actually was an aggregate total. That was taken out before my time. I don't know why, but there is no aggregate annual total.
Because of that abuse, but see, it's still happening, and that's the question is, you know, we're trying to make sure we're on state contract and those things, and so that's my other, I don't know how you fix it, but good luck.
Yeah, so that one's, and then if we go to the P-card Wells Fargo card is, I don't know what section that is. We're still in 6. We're still in 6. Last paragraph. There is, says, the purchasing log, it's the second sentence, purchasing log should either be submitted, and I got it crossed out, so I'm not reading it right, are you on that area?
Yep.
Okay. That one, I don't know if the clerk auditor wants that one, or is talking about maintaining logs and having, you know, to keep these logs in place. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but the thing is there's a certain expectation of the clerk auditor's office kind of overseeing and having these, there's more work involved in the clerk auditor's office. And then second, if we wanted to maintain those, we don't have a time frame. It's just indefinite. So if we're putting this into a policy, then we're gonna have to keep these logs almost forever, well, for a long time anyway, because unless we fall underneath the state rule of disposal. And so I think that we should at least put in there for X amount of years in case of an audit, whatever that is, if it's 3 years or whatever, so that we have that record.
Mr. Chairman, well, I would suggest then what we do in this case is go ahead and just put in the time frame that the state retention schedule says.
Right.
That we keep those records. Because it is something that's important, we keep records, but it's also important that once they've hit their legal life and can be disposed of, they should be disposed of.
Well, I looked into that a bit, and part of the question here is, what kind of a record is it? Is it a financial record? Is it a purchasing record? Is it an informal log? I guess we sort of have to determine what kind of a record it is before we can determine how long it needs to be retained.
Well, I've always looked at it as, and what we tried to do when we had this conversation about this a few months ago was, because we held that P-card training and told everybody within 30 days or by one day every month, you make sure you've reconciled this account, because therein lies part of our problem. To me, it's a log at which we're asking them to account to their department head, the department head signing off under the budget. So the question is if the log is done correctly, it should actually match our financial system, and, it probably duplicate, but, still, government doesn't matter if you duplicate. If we create a record, we have to store it, so.
And it's a backup so that, and it can be used, it's a useful tool.
Sure.
So, 2 months later, oh, where did this charge come from? You can pull up your log, oh, I checked it out to Joe, and he's the one,
Yeah.
And otherwise you wouldn't have any record of it.
Especially with a department card. Because if you have questions and you don't know who used it, then it becomes
Yep.
just this card that no one has any responsibility to.
But it's still on, because the retention requirement is different depending on what kind of record it is. I think for finance it's 7 years, I think, and I think for purchasing it's 4. So I guess we need to figure out what kind of record we want to call it, and then
And
use
Dave can
that.
correct me if I'm wrong, I'd suggest we just talk to our grandma officer in the civil division for guidance.
And just put a time frame according to whatever's appropriate.
Or just put a reference to,
Yeah.
not exact same claim, but just in accordance with the
State retention schedule.
Yeah.
Okay? Going on to 7. I think there was just some minor things in the words of, I need to, and I think you agreed to on that one. I can't remember what. It's first paragraph, second, right at the end. In my page, it flips over, so I'm not sure what it looks like on your screens. Needs to instead of just says and be paid, needs to be paid. And then at the very bottom of 7, second paragraph up, in the blue again, in limited circumstances, where it starts off, in limited circumstances, a missing receipt from form may be allowed to substitute for an itemized receipt. Of course, this is an exemption to an exception to the policy again. And I understand that receipts can be missing, and we can't go back and find the receipts, but just want to point out that it is a.
And that's not a change. That policy's always been.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's been reworded. One must be signed by a department head. Anyway, and then if we go on to 8, so number 8, unauthorized uses. Number 4 has travel expenses, UMB card. I know Commissioner Graves spoke a little bit about this. In parentheses, UMB card should be used for travel expenses. It doesn't have, down there, air, hotel, taxis, whatever. I mean, I don't know if you just put travel expenses, and like I said, when I first came into office, that was very confusing, and so we had to kind of get a certain amount of training on that. If we had it defined on what that was, that'd be helpful. On number 5, when it talks about IT equipment, should be purchased through the county's IT department and should not be purchased directly by the requesting departments. What about software? What about computers, computer-related equipment, furnitures, telecommunications, tele-equipment? You know, I mean, there's a whole list of things that, anyway, that are.
It should be added to that list, you're saying?
That I think we should at least consider and look at, or I don't, it's just, I think that word, we need to reword that a little bit. Going down to the following one, I know we had a little talk on this one. This is the following purchases shall be made only after receiving written approval from the purchasing agent. Again, this is our exceptions to the policy. Capital equipment purchases. And this one kind of collides, for me, it collides with other policies that we have in place. For instance, what if it's not delivered? What if it crosses over a budget year? And so I worry about that. I worry about if we're colliding with other policies that are out there when it comes to, especially budgeting, because we're trying to close out a year. We're trying to say this is the last time. This is your budget. Let's do it to the end of the year. And now all of a sudden we're doing purchase cards at the end of the year and purchasing things, even though they're not delivered until the next year, which we usually, because it's a budget item, department heads will come to us and say, hey, this is what we're trying to purchase within our budget. We need to take that over. And now we've got purchase cards going through, and our budgets are getting messed up.
Well, a couple of things on that, particularly with the capital equipment. That would be a pretty rare occurrence, again, because of the credit limits on the card. So really the only way that they'd be able to do that, they'd have to come through me to get a temporary increase to the card limit in order to do it. So it would be a pretty rare occurrence, and it would be with my full knowledge of what they were doing. And some of the concerns you raised are the same concerns you'd have if they were just doing a PO to the vendor as well. It wouldn't be any different doing it through the P card as through, you know,
It hit their budget
Actually,
different.
it is a little different, and this is why. So, the PO system, if they do it, if they create a PO for the vendor, there's 100% certainty they cannot create a PO in our system unless they already have identified budgetary funds.
Right.
Therein lies the problem, and so I know in the health department and DDAP, there are times that which medications this is used for, and it's a great thing that we do. But the problem is at the same time, the onus is on you and them to make sure, because those are some hefty expenses at times, to make sure there's budget in them.
Well, and in this case, since it would be over 2,500, they would have to have a PO in place before they could do it
Right.
anyway.
That's true.
And then the next one is, we talked a little bit about this one already, professional services. I understand if we have a contract in place to pay with the P card, I don't have a problem with that part of it. But those are not necessarily the ones that I see that are on my screen that have other questions. And so I would like to see professional services be put up in the unauthorized use, or at least partially put up in the unauthorized use, unless and written in and agreed upon with the commission, unless there's a contract in place. If there's a contract in place, then
There's
they
some
could pay
cases where
that.
contract's not required. I mean, if it's a one-time $100 payment, there's no requirement for a contract. I think the reason you're seeing a lot of those that are showing up on your screen is simply because of our existing purchasing rule. It was charged at $3,100, so it gets flagged. And it's one that I missed. I didn't notice that it was being charged to $3,100. I approved it, and then it got flagged, and that's why it's showing up on your. Really, most of those, the only reason it's on there is because it was charged to $3,100, and our rule says it's not supposed to be charged to the P card. I don't know if there was any issue with the purchase itself, other than it was charged to the P card and shouldn't have been.
See, I don't have a problem with the under contract when we're talking in the health department when it comes to, I think the last one we had, I can't remember what it was that was on there, but some
Yeah, I think it
medicines
was
of some sort.
lab services. or
Lab
something like that,
services,
or
but it was under contract.
Right.
And so that seems appropriate to me. What I'm concerned about is that all of a sudden the money should be a deliberate purchase, and all of a sudden now we're in a bind of some sort, or we haven't prepared properly for it, and just swipe the P card and it just goes through without without any checks, without going through the process. And then afterwards, we take it and say, oh, now, oh yeah, we got to go through some sort of process with it to get it done. But it's already been expended before we even go back and try to fix it.
Well, if they adhere to if they adhere to this change here, they wouldn't be able to do that without my prior approval.
Okay, but can I give you, here's my only issue with this one. This is kind of a counter argument to it. I believe it was last week, could have been 2 weeks ago on the commission agenda. Pat Bird came up and there was a ratification for services that were definitely valid, right? But because of contractual and things like that, I would hate for, because I know I was deeply involved in the rebate negotiation a couple years ago. I would hate for us to miss that opportunity because we might not have a contract in place and a simple discussion with them, with you, and a portfolio commissioner and or another commissioner could easily solve that, you know, even though it may take 2-3 months to get some of the supporting documents in that case where we all know that this is practice and this is valid. So
That's a good point. I mean, we do ratifications all the time.
Right.
You know, on the spot. And so.
And if
when we
there's a
have-
case for them to
when
use
we have
that-
these exemptions all the time, then there is no ratification. We don't know where it's at and what's
Yeah.
going on with it. That's the concern I have with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll get calls often to say, hey, do you support this? And I'll look at it and then email it back, and that's the process we have in place, and it happens. You see ratifications probably even on our agenda right now.
Yep.
Because of those things that are happening. Below that, the next little line, talking about any employee found using the card for one of these unauthorized uses is subject to employment disciplinary process. What is that process? I don't even know what what is it? Do we have something defined on it?
Yeah,
What's
that's
the
only,
methodology that we're using on this?
no, that's only if the department head and or supervisor wishes to discipline on it. That was my kind of thing with that. I think that definitely needs some work.
Yeah, because I hate putting something in there that and is it gonna be different with every department? I mean, is this policy for the county, or is it, I don't know.
I'm
I
assuming
just
that's-
read that and I
I'm
don't
assuming
know
that's
what
just
that
the
means.
HR policy. I mean, it's not something that I would be initiating.
Wouldn't it just fall under HR's policy?
What is it?
Yeah.
It'd be in our rules and regulations under HR.
So we should refer that to, at least refer it, you know,
So it'd
to
be like
that
disciplinary
specific.
process. And
We know what that is.
Can I back up just for a second? I'm not sure what it was you were recommending on the professional services under 8. Was it-
Well, I see the
Define
need, I see
contractual
the need
language
to
or
use the
something
P cards, or you can use the P cards with contracts in place. And I have no problem with doing that for obviously county benefit when it comes to using the card and the funds that could come back to us. But I think that one should have some sort of a split defined. It's unauthorized use in certain areas, but then, you know, it's okay to use in other areas. I think that should be split apart and have some more definition to it. And then, let's see, this one's under, my wife keeps telling me that I need to get glasses, and I probably should.
I've got my Walmart glasses here.
Yeah.
Did you use
It
the,
probably
just
would-
kidding.
Probably work. I'm going to, I don't know how to, so number 11 says cutoff periods, and then it has, 12 is purchase card process. And it has renumbered to number 4, just, you know, it has on there another exception to the rule. We kind of, there's another exception there. And then last, in the forms themselves, the very first form that I have anyway talks about Utah County Purchase Card Request Form. It has down here the signature of the commission chair. And in talking with Robert about this one, I'm wondering if the reason why that one, it bothers me that it says commission chair, because we're trying to look for some efficiencies on this. The commission chair can't use his signature unless two commissioners agree, because that's what the commission chair does. This is just a request form. I'm wondering if we shouldn't change that to the portfolio commissioner, because I think it's cumbersome to say that now the commission chair, we've got to go and get 2 commissioners for just a request form.
Sure.
Let's put
I like
portfolio
that.
commissioner on
I
there.
like that idea.
Works for me.
So the one question I would have really quick, since he's sitting on the front row, is where all three of us are for the sheriff, does that mean any of the three can sign? So, I know I kind of saw you.
I'd say yes.
Okay, so I like that change too.
So I know I threw a lot in there, and I don't know if the ones I were proposing, if you are agreeing with them, or do we want to
Yeah,
discuss them more?
The only one is, so going back to custodian, see, all of these forms refer to custodian. That was still my only question, rather than,
Okay,
so that one, unless we want to change what we call them on all the forms, I like the uniformity of custodian only from that standpoint.
And my thought would be a revision and look at it next week.
Yeah. Make a couple
the
changes
changes.
and
That'd be
clarifying,
Back
get
on for
with the
next
civil
week?
division on a couple of those things.
If a week enough time for you to make those?
Yeah, it should.
And that would be my thoughts.
fair enough.
No real red flags for me, just,
Okay,
there's a lot, so you'd like to see it,
yeah, see the whole thing
see the whole
together.
thing together.
Okay. Then I'll move that we continue item 3 for 1 week.
Second,
A motion and second, continue regular agenda item number 3 for 1 week. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye?
Aye. Motion carries 3-0. Next up, we have regular agenda item number 4. This is to adopt or deny an ordinance in relationship to non-conforming lots of record. If you want to start us off with this.
You bet. Brandon Larson, Community Development Staff. The applicant, Ryan Schramm, has a property in over by Elk Ridge that's honestly just 0.04 of an acre short of meeting the zone area minimum for a dwelling. And so he's been trying to find different ways to get around that, or not to get around it, but try to develop his property. And so the first thing that he brought forward to the county was an application to amend the definition of subdivision. Definition of subdivision tells you what a subdivision is and what it is not. And one of the portions of the section that tells you what it is not says that when you do a boundary line agreement, it tells you you can do it and it's not a subdivision. However, when you do a boundary line agreement, you can't create a new dwelling site. So what that means is he can't, if he has 4.99 acres and his neighbor has 5.01, he can't do a boundary line agreement to pick up that 100th of an acre to make his lot buildable. He has to go through the subdivision process. So his proposal initially was to change that. It was a little more, there's a little more substance to that. It included the ability to change up to 5 lots, and there were some other things involved in there as well. But essentially it would have given him the ability to make those boundary line agreements and change up to 5 parcels, I should say. So this item, when it went to the Planning Commission, it was continued for 2 months for the applicant and staff to try to find another alternative, because staff wasn't supportive of the change of the definition of subdivision, because in going around, we love an efficient process, but there's kind of pros and cons. And if we allow for that more efficient process, we give up the ability to get road dedication, particularly with his proposal. If he found a situation where he could have amended or did a boundary line agreement and created 5 new dwelling sites without going through the subdivision process, all of a sudden you lose a quarter mile of road dedication. So that was our concern, as well as the subdivision process also requires the developer to clear the right-of-way, and we see some obvious benefit to getting power poles out of the right-of-way. So those were our concerns with his original proposal, and so the Planning Commission told us to go back to the drawing board and look and see if there was something else. So we talked about him just trying to pick up some additional land to go through the subdivision process. There's some challenges, and he can speak to that a little bit more, but it does appear that there are some constraints with his neighbors. They're just it seems challenging to try to pick up additional land, so.
Question for you.
Sure,
Is
yeah.
this land identified in any city's annexation declarations?
That's a really good I truthfully don't recall if it was. It could be in Payson's, and I'm not 100% sure on that.
The reason I ask is because this was brought to me by a mayor that I sat down with, and I'm going to be coming over, and we're going to spend a lot of time because this is a concern with the growth that's expanding in all areas of the county, right? We have our RA5 zones, and we've talked about some of those other zones. What some of these mayors are concerned about is in our RA5 zone, we're allowing one home.
Right.
Not a problem. But the problem is when you have an area where on our master transportation plan and in moving people east and west, which is still the problem, Salt Lake County and Utah County to some degree, the county is counterproductive to that because we allow an RA5, and so we have 10 parcels and we have 2 roads that go in between, right?
Yep.
And because we allow an RA5, and we have all these one homes, all of a sudden we're creating all these potential cul-de-sacs, which become a nightmare for every traffic, and we put an increased load on all these. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in some of these because I know the county's general plan has always been we don't do it, but when we have policies that allow people to do it inside the county, I mean, we have some work to do because I think, and I'm going to involve Richard so that we're making sure from a transportation plan, we don't bog down. And again, I'm not trying to stop anybody from utilizing their land how they want, but we just need to make sure we're doing the right thing for everybody. So
one of the things that I think is beneficial in our current ordinance is that so there's different types of developments you can do, and our most common one is just a planned subdivision. They're the garden variety I bring you here often, 1 to 2 lots, and they actually don't allow for dead-end streets in those developments. Like if you do a rec resort or a mountain home development, those are typically up in the canyons. Those actually do allow for cul-de-sacs. These types of developments that you see in the valley don't allow.
So again, I know our ordinance doesn't allow for dead-end street, okay? But what it does allow, we would dedicate potentially some portion of a road.
Sure.
We wouldn't require them to go all the way through their lot.
Yep.
If they put their home at the end, right? What I'm talking about is if they put their home at the end,
Yep.
unfortunately they pass away, they deed it to their kids, they want their kids to move, then all of a sudden they come and bisect their own land, and you've created dead-end roads literally in every 5-acre parcel because all of a sudden they've given an acre to each of their kids, and they still dedicate the land back to the city, and we have, and that's what I'm talking about is our ordinance, and that's where some of the mayors, they're seeing growth, and it's becoming a problem for them because utility easements, taking care of the citizens properly on some of these things go through a lot of road dedications, and if not, we're going to be going through, not us, but cities. And so that's why I say it, to me, I want to bring those concerns and go, so it just fits in this conversation,
I
unfortunately.
know we're going to have an interesting conversation.
So how did the planning commission vote on this?
They were, so that this was the first part. What I've explained is just kind of the first part. So we went back and we talked about subdivision, then we talked about, so again, they continued the discussion of definition of subdivision. They told us to go back. We talked about subdivision, then we talked about amending section 16J, which allows for non-conforming lots of record to be eligible for dwellings, for building permits for dwellings in the RA5 zone. Because if you look at section 16J, it says all of these zones, TR5, RR5, they allow, if you have a non-conforming lot of record, meaning like say back in the 70s there was a 1-acre zone and then the zoning got changed to 5 acres, like a 3-acre parcel would be eligible for a building permit. Well, they specifically excluded in the 1976 ordinance. I said 84 in my staff report. I actually found out it was a 76 ordinance. They specifically excluded the RA5 zone from being able to qualify for a dwelling site or for a building permit in the RA5 zone, and staff believes the reason for that was just it seems to go along with everything else they were doing. So the predecessor to the RA5 zone was the A1 zone, and they made a big effort in the 76 in the 76 ordinance to try to preserve agriculture. So I think they were trying to limit dwelling sites in the A1 zone.
Yeah, so I wanted to emphasize what you said there, because that's one of the notes I have down here.
Yeah.
Right now, for non-conforming lots of record, they are allowed in an RR5 zone, a TR5, a CE1, a CE2, and the M and G1.
Correct.
So we have them in there, but not in the RA5.
Yeah, and as near as I can tell, it looks like they were trying to limit dwelling sites in that A1 zone.
So that doesn't make any sense to me, especially when you're talking about RR5, and I know we're going through a process with it, but they're neighbors, they're right next to each other.
Sure,
And so right next to cities too.
sure.
And same with the TR5, and they're right there. So some of this doesn't make any sense. When I'm looking at this, for me, I'm in favor of going forward with this.
Sure.
Based on, what I read and what seems appropriate and what is fair with neighbor to neighbor that's there as well.
Planning Commission was split, so I try to get to all that. The Planning Commission was split on this. The
They
motion.
basically didn't give us a recommendation, which I find kind of interesting, because we asked for a recommendation and it comes with no recommendation.
Right. Yeah, it's
Yeah, they were mad when we tried to take some of their power away.
It was a 3-3.
yeah, there was no recommendation essentially. So, but that's the concern we had with amending section 16J is, so we went and tried to identify all the parcels in the RA5 zone that seemed like they could benefit from this proposal, and it looks like there's a few hundred. In my staff report, I said there were probably about 600. I went and refined my research a little bit, and it looks like there's probably less than, well, somewhere 200 to 300, I'd say. But that doesn't include the possibility that some of those may be illegally divided and they wouldn't qualify anyway. So there's a
My other
number of
question
them.
on this is,
Sure.
I'm trying to figure out the difference in this. When I served on the Board of Adjustments, we dealt with variances to ordinances. In other words,
Yeah.
we allowed people to circumvent the ordinance to do what made the most sense.
Right.
So why, rather than changing an ordinance before we could fix it, why can't they go through Board of Adjustments and just get a variance and let that group have it, go through and say, well, yeah, that sounds very reasonable, which, knowing those folks, I'm sure that would happen. That's my question.
That was actually my question
Yeah,
as well.
and that-
In these instances, why don't we just apply for a variance?
There's we've brought
Because when
that
we
up
look at the
too.
number of non-conforming lots, we could open up for significant dwellings in these areas, and part of the reason for the restriction of the dwellings is lack of services, right? There's no water, there's no
Correct.
sewer, stuff like that, so we do have a desire to not just protect ag, but because of the nature, when we get out in these zones, the water table is very high, so we become concerned from the health department standard on, the number of septics that are in there and the number of times we're going into the aquifer. So in an incident like this, why don't we just look to the Board of Adjustments?
That's a possibility. There's a number of ways to attack this one, and that's one that hasn't been addressed. It's been brought up, it just hasn't.
Well, and I know
Right.
they frown on it, but I mean, even if the commission offered a letter of support for that move, because again, I don't think we're trying to stop this particular one, but
Sure.
what does it unravel? I
That's
think
my
is kind of what we're
concern.
saying.
Yeah, that may be that certainly is an option, and it hasn't been, it's been brought up, but it hasn't been pursued by the applicant yet,
So
so.
is it too late to be on the July? I know sometimes they canceled the July for Board of Adjustments because of the 4th and where it falls.
It'd be too late. They'd have to submit 28 days before that meeting, which is the
Okay.
first Thursday,
So
so.
it'd be August.
August.
Is this party here?
Yep, Ryan's in the back.
Is August going through that
We'd-
process
Yeah,
a
we'd
big
be happy
deal?
we'd love you to hear from you and have your comment.
You're good.
Just, if you could please state your name for the record.
Ryan Schramm, Mapleton, Utah. To familiarize you with this piece of property, so there's an existing well on it. I mean, it's completely ready to build, other than we're a sliver short. So that's what I was thinking, even if I got up here today, within this code adjustment they were asking, is there possibility to add something on like that? Because this lot's ready. I mean, there's nothing there
Well, and
that
that's what the
doesn't make
Board
it
of
buildable
Adjustments
other
would
than.
do. The
right.
Board of Adjustments listens to it all the time. I mean, like, we allowed warming huts up in, top of AF Canyon or whatever, you know, based on common sense type things, and that's what they do. So my question is to you is, going through that process and having them do that rather than changing the whole ordinance, meaning it'd be the 1st of August, does that severely hamper you and what you're doing?
No, that would work.
Okay.
We could do that.
That would be my preferred process, and if that doesn't work, then this would be the next one to have the commission address that ordinance. That would be my preference for today, if it doesn't cause you any harm.
Okay, and then that would be in August?
Yes, it's the first Thursday in August typically. At 6 o'clock in this building is when it used to be. Could be 7 now, I don't know.
So basically
5:30.
bring the same information and present the same idea, and then if
Yeah.
that doesn't go, we'd come back to this
Yes.
meeting.
Yeah.
Okay,
You're okay with that?
Yes.
'Cause, I mean, I'm just one commissioner on it, but I'm in favor of going forward with it because of the disparity between neighbors that we see out there on a regular
Right.
basis.
right.
But, I mean, if you're fine going that direction, I could support that too.
I can see Brandon's concern. I can see it open it up, making it possible, but that's why I'm saying, where is it at? We've got a piece of property that's buildable right now. I mean, the power's across the street. We've got water. It's not like we've got to get a permit for a well.
And it's
We've got
not
to
our
do a bunch
intent
of
to
other
stop
stuff.
that
but-
for you.
Right.
It's just, that's why I asked you if August works. That's my preference, but
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it would put it back to you a little bit and say, you know, if that's where you're at with it, you'd like to see if that's a better route to address first, then obviously before you voted on it and shoot me
yeah, I'm
down.
definitely more comfortable.
Right.
But again, I don't want to cause you any harm
Right.
and delay.
And I would be fine with that.
Okay.
It's been sitting there for 30 years. It can sit there a couple more months. All right, thank you.
Any additional comment on this one? Seeing none, we'd probably look,
I guess my question is, do we want to strike or continue indefinitely?
I'd probably just strike it.
and
You can
we can
always
bring
come
it
back.
back. That was my
I'll
thought.
move that we
Well,
strike.
let's see, hang on 1 second. Is there money attached to this? If we table it to bring it back, it would still be on the same? Is there money? Have you put forth
Brandon.
money on this?
There is an application that he's paid for, so
If we
that,
tabled it, then it would still be underneath the same. If we strike it, then he's gonna have to go
then
through the
he's gonna
process
have to,
again.
yeah, and we may have to take it back to the planning commission.
So maybe
Then we wanna-
So, okay, I'll move that we continue item 4 without date.
Second.
A motion and a second to continue regular agenda item number 4 without date. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion will carry 3-0. Next on our agenda is regular agenda item number 6. This is to look at authorizing the funding and implementation of some of the study committee's results and recommendations. We'll look to Lena Jensen, our HR director, for a brief introduction here.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is a topic that we introduced 3 weeks ago on the work study agenda, work session, and kind of went through a detailed description of the process that we as a committee went through to kind of review the market study results. And so I'm not going to repeat everything I said then, but since that time, I've provided you with some detail and some backup as to how the implementation is proposed, and tried to be responsive to your requests and your questions, and hopefully given you the answers that you need. And so we're here
Thank
today
you.
to,
I know we spent a lot of time together on this.
yes, you're welcome. So today we're hoping to move to the next step where we continue the discussion and hopefully arrive at a decision in the near future. Just to remind you, the recommendation is based on our county pay plan, where we're supposed to recommend increases based on a market study every 3rd year. As a committee, we felt and still feel like it's really important that we don't fall behind in our salary structure. The overall cost to implement beginning pay period 15 was just over $1 million for the general fund and under $1 million for the other funds. And so, again, we're here to hopefully continue the discussion and arrive at a conclusion.
Great summary. Thank you very much. And again, I would applaud you, your staff, and also the department heads who worked very diligently on this process, which involved a lot of discussion. So, and your responsiveness back to us. I'll go ahead and open it for the board if there's questions.
Well, I'd like to say just a couple things, because I unfortunately wasn't in town during that. The one thing that I have done, and I know the fellow commissioners have done, and Lena has done as well, is I have talked to all the department heads that I can think of. I don't think I missed any. And they have all agreed that this is the best thing and, you know, have been involved in the process or had a representative involved. That was important for me and the fellow commissioners that they are, and so they have been. So I think it's important for all of our great employees to understand that their department heads participate in this fully, at least to my satisfaction, what I thought would be fully. I don't want to speak for any on the other. When it comes to the funds that was identified, because since that got put in there, and I'm referring to the including additional salary and benefits page that talks about the implementation total funds that's attached to the agenda that everybody can see. The general fund going forward, and that pay period 15, just so everybody knows the date, is July 20th. Most people saw that.
The pay period actually starts June 30th.
Right, but the pay date is July 20th.
Right.
The $1,081,632 for the general fund. Just so, this is kind of, for me, the nuts and bolts is always making sure, like the other commissioners, that it can be afforded. For me, we adopted the tax rate, just so I can be clear, that's $1.4 million in excess for next year. Now, funding that means that department heads are going to potentially have to tighten the screws on external costs so that we can make sure we take care of the employees, potentially. In the A&C fund, that's $362,000. So again, that non-general fund, I believe, is identified all as the A&C employees, right? So
Plus
again,
a few others, but mostly.
and there is a surplus in there. So I know that's a debate, but as far as funds identified going forward, that's kind of what is in there. The other health department and DDAP, that one, I kind of wish it wasn't in there like that. It is a one-time fee that we pay, but because of their contracts and stuff, that does get reimbursed and swallowed in. So it's kind of an artificial number. It's not right this minute, but it is kind of an artificial number going forward. So from that standpoint, that's, I mean, the other thing that I brought up during budget season and in checking with Deneen, which I kind of thought this is, and I referred to it as a commission slush fund. I want to be very clear and identify to what it really is. It's not a commission slush fund. Previous commissioners have done a very good job of making sure we're ready for the future and rainy days. We have been budgeting, and because of growth and everything, we're starting to dip into that. So serious discussions need to be had in the future. However, there is $9 million in what we call the capital expense account. The reason I have referred to it as a commission slush fund is because by law, we can only retain X amount in our rainy day or our, you know, I can't remember exactly what it's called now. I just blanked. Brian? Our fund balance, thank you. And once you exceed that, you have to find ways to do it. You can either reduce the rate, which they didn't. They chose to save it and plan, so they didn't have to bond or do some of these things for the future. That money can be reallocated back into the general fund at any time. And so there is roughly $9 million in there. That would allow us to spend and give us comfort over the next couple of years by instituting this to reevaluate how the departments are doing on the additional spending and things like that, making sure we rein it in without having to talk about maybe significant tax increase this year or, you know, get a better balance. And that's just kind of my first thinking. But
That's only if, which you said, if we have some tightening of the screws.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the only if.
right, and that is,
Yeah.
so, and I should have stated that more clearly. When I talked to department heads, I actually asked, I think almost every one of them this question. I don't want to say everyone because I may have missed one, but I always said, is it more important to you to, and I use this as a poor example, but to continue to have water in your office or fund your employees? And the reason I say the water is because it's an external expense that, you know, those type of things that can potentially get cut. And every one of them said, I'd rather cut there and take care of my employees. I want them to realize that's important to me because when the budget list just got, for this upcoming budget, just got published, I will use those words against you again to make sure we understand, because it is my intention to vote on whatever and implement this, but to also make sure those department heads are accountable for their words as well. So, anyway.
All right. Lena, again, thank you for, I don't even know how many hours. It's probably been 10 or 12 hours that we've sat and worked through just numbers and numbers and numbers and more numbers. In looking down through this, I want to start this way. after going through the process and seeing what Lena has and presented to me, I'm feeling comfortable with going forward with what is proposed, sort of. I mean, to a certain extent, there's a level of comfort I have there. And maybe I'll start with that. There's a couple positions that I think last year that we made some adjustments on, that we said we're going to be implemented appropriately, and we actually gave some direction to the HR department on that didn't match in what happened here. And so there's just a few. There's a few in there that I think that need to be adjusted, and we need to have more conversation on. So I'd hope that as we look at accepting these numbers, that there are a few in there that we need to have conversation on from the past that we've already talked about. But I wanted to. This has been very uncomfortable for me in a lot of respects, and I'll try to tell you why. I like to have the data that I can look at and actually read it, analyze it, and then verify it to a certain extent, and then understand it. And I spend a tremendous amount of time in this trying to get to that level. And there's a few things that are just going to have to be accepted and realize that they're accepted. What this is going to do, though, and I'm sorry I'm rambling, but I'm going to try to get to it, is that there's two sides to this. If we accept the numbers that are proposed here, that's only half of the equation. The other half of the equation is the implementation, because we've had multiple, even with the last one, ways of implementing or moving people through this process. And so that implementation is the second half, in which we have not spent time in. We've only spent most of our time in just the numbers themselves. And so in looking at the positions, these are rough numbers, there's roughly about 355 positions in the county. When you group them together, we're not talking about people, we're just talking about positions. Of those 355 positions, Lena went out there and did some benchmarking with them, and about 50 of them she went down through and did some auditing on and did some verification with. Is that kind of fair?
I think so.
I went down and counted.
Okay.
So,
I didn't count, but that sounds
yeah,
about
I
right.
counted. So about 50 of them or so, which turns out that we kind of double checked or cross checked about 7% of that market study that was put out there. Of that 7%, 78% of them were adjusted down. 22% of them were adjusted higher than what was being proposed. So when I look at a number like that, and this is where it gets uncomfortable, we basically did an audit on about 7% of the positions, not people, positions, and we had these kind of adjustments within that 7%. If I was to take the 93% of the positions that are left over and put them into the adjusting of the auditing, I don't know what that would look like. Is there some that are above and some below? I'd have to say yes on there. But I think subjective-wise, as we're going through this process with the department heads, we're trying to find some level of comfort with it and then be able to move forward. I think that's the ultimate goal. So for me, when I look at, and you sent these numbers to me, because just implementing it for this year is short-sighted, because it does affect years to come.
Right.
So in the general fund, when we're talking about payroll itself, it is in the general fund, it's about a 5.8% increase, and that'll be on top of. And I just want to point these out. And again, it was totally offensive to me to look down and see some people that were 25% below. That is unacceptable. We should never have that happen in the county when people are that far below. So bringing them up to a market that actually works and is comfortable, I'm applauding that. Again, going back to the numbers though, the general fund, we were 5.8% increase on top of the 3.2 that we gave on the COLA. So we're looking at 9% increase. I would like to tag the year as this is the year of the employees, not the year of department increase or expenditures. Like Commissioner Graves said, there's going to have to be some adjusting. It can't, all this increase cannot fall on the commission trying to find this money. It's going to have to be a collaborative effort. So I worry that we're saying we're gonna fully fund this, in the wordings that's in there, without having that discussion of what that looks like. I feel comfortable probably going forward and saying we're accepting the numbers to a certain extent. There's some variations that need to be adjusted. And now we need to find the implementation that will be acceptable. As the department heads are saying they're fully on board with this thing, they need to come to the table so we can work down through the concerns that are there. Just looking at this account still, so overall, with the payroll increase, it's about 6.1% with the budget, and that is reflective also, because you have to look at the benefit side. You're looking at a 6.1, so you add the 3.2 on top of that, and you're up there with significant increase to the employees of the county, so that we can get on a level that will make sense for us going forward and pay appropriately. That's how I'm viewing this, even with the uncomfortableness that I have with how we looked at this all the way through. The one thing I want to point out, though, too, is we talk about all the, and this is just a part for me that I can't understand still, but we talk about all the department heads who are in that committee. Frankly, the committee was outside of its scope from what the commission basically directed them to do. And we say all the department heads were there, except for one. And that was the commission department head, wasn't there in those meetings. So that bothers me that the commission head was not a part of that. We talk about all the departments there. And I'm saying that even the commission, when it comes to the budget time, we're looking about an $18,000 increase to the budget of the commission budget, which I think we are going to have to tighten the screws on, and we're going to have to say, same thing as everyone else. This is going to have to be, knocked down. Maybe we're going to have to forego going in this direction. Maybe we're going to have to find the monies here and there somewhere, the same as the rest. But I would hope that we do that with all the department heads, into the future, and find a way that we can allow this to work. Overall, with the percent of increases, with the benefits and the salaries, we're looking at $4,196,318 per year to fully implement it the way that it's looking right now. That's next year.
For full year.
Yeah. And then last off with this, I still have a problem with the back pay. We made a commitment to that on the back pay, and I have not seen anything that had, for me personally, that says that we're releasing that commitment. That bothers me, and it bothers me to a level where I don't know how to do the implementation. So I feel comfortable if we were to accept the numbers to a certain extent today, but the implementation, and I would like to put in there too, the analysis going forward when it comes to even the back pay that's in there, that we've got to fold this into the conversation in the future and not accept the full funding of this until we know what the funding looks like and where it's going to come from. That's my thoughts.
Mine are fairly simple. I think best solutions come when we put our heads together and work, and we generally know we're at the right place when everybody's a little unhappy. And I think that we've done that. I think they've put their heads together. You've worked very hard at putting this together. You've looked at the data that we paid for. You've tried to spot check it to make sure we're within the ballpark and the correct parameters. I think all of the department heads gave a little bit, and they're all a little unhappy, and they're all a little happy with the progress. But I think what they definitely accomplished was actually taking an idea, which was trying to bring these people back up, and come up with something that's probably even a little better for the long-term benefit of the employees of the county. And that's an implementation that not just helps us this year, but moves us forward in the right direction going ahead. So I'm comfortable with where this is at, and I think I think the department heads are committed to helping us make it work financially, not just this year, but into the next budgeting seasons.
You want me to respond at all to,
If
just say about the 50 jobs, and I didn't count, but if that's right, that's about a seventh of 350, so I'm thinking the percentage would be more like 15 maybe than 7%, but also we looked at
About personnel, I mean people, or are you talking about
jobs.
positions?
I'm just using your 50 out of 350. I don't know if that's, I didn't
I
count.
just
but-
counted off your thing, how many you
Okay.
had on the side that you said that you
But I
went
would
through
say
a
for the ones
process.
that we did look up, it didn't necessarily just impact that job. It also had kind of a, domino
Oh, I see.
effect or ripple effect maybe to other jobs. So I do feel like we did a pretty thorough review. But, we've had that discussion before. And as far as the back pay, the cost of it would essentially double because you'd be looking at a full year versus a half year, which is what we
Well,
put in the proposal.
so, just in case it wasn't clear in my email, and I'll attempt to speak for Commissioner Lee, and I hate to do that, but I will definitely allow him to clarify. What he's saying, because he and I have had this conversation, we're not saying we don't want back pay. The question and where we've been is we've been told, you can't do it, Workday doesn't do it. That's the uneasiness we have. We don't like being told we can't do something we've promised because of something that isn't working right. And that's what I think we're trying to say is we want to find a way to do everything the right way. And so, that is troublesome. And I know certain attorneys and I've gone the battle over this for a couple months. But yeah, that's my problem. I know we committed, and
Yeah.
I went back and reviewed the meeting and the electronic minutes of when this was done, and Commissioner Ivey, when he set aside $1 million in the budget, literally talked about to making sure this got implemented right. And Commissioner Lee talked about we all were on the same page as far as making sure it was done that way. And I think that's some of the uneasiness is we feel like we committed and made a statement, and none of us like to.
Right. And I would just say, historically, we've implemented market study at mid-year pretty much, so this seems kind of, normal to me. I wasn't here for those discussions. But if that's something you wanted to do on top of the implementation at mid-year, we could find a way to approximate, adding in some additional to sort of acknowledge that.
Sure.
But it's true that right now, the Workday system does not
Well, and I
handle
think for me, what that
retroactive pay.
allows me to do is go ahead with an implementation going forward while reviewing the budget and going forward to figure out how to do that with the department heads, understanding what that means for next year and finding those places to potentially have them even turn back some money this year and seeing if we can identify those and work together so that we can get that back pay. And I understand, when you're talking back pay, it's, I don't want to set an unrealistic expectation, but for me, that means to work out some of these issues, we're probably looking at more of a September deadline. And so again, it's not because of lack of commission trying or HR trying or anybody trying. I'm just trying to paint a realistic, before we could get there, I don't see it happening any sooner than that. So,
Okay.
for me.
And obviously, that's up to you. I would just say we're also at right about the point we have to start running all the budget reports, and so we're
Right, I
gonna need to
understand,
know
but I'm
kind of
talking about-
how this is gonna.
I'm talking about getting with department heads to find room in their their current
Okay.
budget to help. So they
Yeah.
can understand and kind of, so they're ready for the budget season as well. To me, that's a good exercise to kind of go through with them. See how committed they really are.
Since you brought that up, I'd like to speak on it. Last year, when we voted on this and put that in there, we put that $1 million in there, and frankly, that $1 million was just a stopgap measure. It was not something that was calculated to, it wasn't something that was, right
Budget
down.
holder,
It was,
placeholder.
it was a placeholder. It was a placeholder on there. The commitment was made, and I take that commitment seriously on my part, understanding that it was a placeholder to help kind of stop some of this and move people up there on there. And so when I received this information for the first time and was being told that no, the employees don't want the back pay, I didn't believe it. Didn't believe it at all. And it's like everyone knows out there, I sent that email out asking, and based off of information that I had before, which was this is what we were going to do with that back pay, and we were going to have that back pay come in and be used. And now I'm being told that no, the employees don't want that, which again I didn't believe, so I threw it out there as an email. Simple question: based on the information that I had from the previous to that point, not going with the information that I have now. And 82%, and I want to thank the employees who, I'll put it this way, and it's going to sting a little bit, but professionally responded back, on that email, with, even with some professional questions on it. They responded back to that with the information that they had, which I had before, not with the information going forward. So for me, when I look at that and I say we have that now, this is a whole different scenario, which we never had back then when we were looking at that $1 million. We didn't have this. We didn't have any of this information of what we could do. I don't know how we get past that. Like I said, 82%, and this is hundreds and hundreds of emails that came back to me on this. I don't know, hundreds and hundreds, but there was a lot. There's a lot of emails that came back, and not everyone hit reply all, just so you know.
Right.
Yeah, but and a lot of constructive.
Which, by the way, after that thread, we could have a reply all policy, and that wouldn't offend me.
Yeah, and so again, 82% said, according to the information that they had, which that's what I had at that time as well, they wanted the back pay, and they wanted to, and most of them would say, well, if I'm eligible for it, I don't know if I am. I would like to have the back pay, and then of course there was all kinds of other comments. But that's the reason why, as we're looking down through this, I feel comfortable saying, again, I'll just reiterate it, I feel comfortable saying that we accept the numbers with some variations that we need to talk about, and leave it at that as we look at now how it's going to be implemented on the second phase of this when it comes to the funding, instead of just saying we're authorizing the funding and implementation of the compensation study, the study committee's results, when we haven't even looked at the second half of how that's going to work yet in the way of the funding stream to come into play.
Well, and I would just say, I mean, all employees would probably say, yes, I'd like back pay, as opposed to, no, I don't want back pay. But to me, the integrity of the salary structure is what would be fixed by the implementation going forward. And so I'm hoping we can do that and then go back and address, something on the retroactive side if that's what you want to do. But to me, I wouldn't give up the going forward, getting things where they need to be in order to, because of the back pay issue.
Can I address that just real quick? So maybe to help you a little bit, Commissioner Lee, that's why when I talk about the back pay, there has to be some serious work done as far as if you go under the guidance that we basically put a budget placeholder of $1 million. So from the general fund, we're basically there. And that's why there needs to be some work on it. But, and I'll let you talk to that. But the other point, and I forgot to address this, that Commissioner Lee brought up is very concerning to me as well. To try and help certain departments in the last year, we have given significant starts to make sure we can fund, or so that they can replace and do the essential needs of the county. Well, I can think of two department heads particularly. Both those were under the understanding that we are funding it at a level that they will maintain that level at this implementation. The new range can move, but we are giving that current market that I'm not comfortable giving anything more than that, because that was the agreed upon understanding, knowing that they're still eligible for their annual increases if they are or whatever. So to that, and I apologize, I meant to talk about that. That part for me would need to be fixed as well, because that was the agreed upon within the last few months.
And that's one reason that we haven't really published,
Right.
person by person type report yet, because there is still some fine tuning. Those reports are generated making certain assumptions, and I know there are a handful at least of situations where we will adjust that recommendation for certain individual situations.
I also think sometimes we have to ask ourselves, do we want an extra dollar today, or do we want $2 extra every 2 weeks moving forward?
Right.
Agreed.
Yeah, and so, and again, I'm fine with that, if the employees will release us from that commitment.
Well, and I think that's part of the conversation.
How do we get that?
We need to have.
How do we have that conversation?
Well, I think we need to have it at our next department head meeting with all the department heads coming prepared to have that serious discussion, because and I will say this, all of the commission, when I sent out that email, I'm dead serious, we are united in our understanding and our implementation of this. And it is our understanding and our wish that the department heads are the go-to person and or your supervisor, because that's why we want them to play a role. That's why I think in our department head meeting, the agenda needs to be very serious for them to come back and talk about back pay and how we get there, and if they can find room and really review their budgets. And I, want them to go through the process. And I know it's tough. There are things that have happened, but there are things that we may be able to look at and say, you know what, okay, we can maybe spread this out. And so I think for that standpoint, and, we let the employees know where we're at along the way with the department heads.
Absolutely.
So
I think, for me again, I am fine, and now that I have this information that it's different than when I first sent out that email, because that email went back to when we made that commitment, I see the advantage. I see the advantage for the employees. Again, this is the year of the employees. If this is gonna be the year of the employees, and it's not just the employees for short term, this is the advantage for the employees going forward as well. And if that's the case, then, the employees, I had emails come back and they said, I'm gonna hold you to that commitment. I really want that commitment, because they're in different circumstances. Somebody's looking at retiring. They're not necessarily concerned about next year or the next year. They're concerned about this year. And I get that. Everyone's in a different position in what's going on. And so how do we get past that? How do we get past that commitment that was made? And personally, and I'll say this, and whatever, if the employees are looking at it or whatever, I think it's to the overall, it's to the employees' advantage to say, okay, forget about the back pay on this thing, let's go forward. That's how I personally feel. But I did make a commitment personally back then too, which I have not seen a release from yet.
So department heads, the challenge is out there.
I'd anticipate we might have some additional comment on this subject, so we'd open it up at this time for that.
Robert Moore, let me just say something real quickly. I think the question really is what you've stated, whether you're going to for back pay, are you going to sacrifice a full implementation of this study? And if the question is between a partial implementation and back pay versus a full implementation of a market study with no back pay, I think the results, if that was the question asked, Commissioner Lee, I think the results would be different. I think most people would understand that, look, if I'm going to get a partial implementation, so I'm not going to get my full, I'm not going to be brought up to market. I'm going to be still short of market, but yet I'm going to get some back pay. I think most people would say, I would rather be brought up to market because I can see that next year I'm going to make more money and the year after, and that's going to affect my retirement. I'm going to make a lot more money coming up to full implementation of the market study. And if that's the question, I think you'd have a different answer. I think we'd all love to have a full implementation plus back pay. I think that's a lot more.
Well, I don't think that's the question. That was not the question in my mind.
Yeah.
Where it was either back pay or full implementation. The question is in my mind is, do we do back pay and then the full implementation? We do the full implementation, but there has to be a little bit of a delay factor in the full implementation. That's a different question. Yes, that is a different question. That was the question in my mind.
Okay.
If we do the back pay, because what happens if we do the back pay, that $4 million that we're talking about right here becomes a reality for this year.
This year, yes.
That's what that looks like.
You are correct.
We did not budget for that.
That's correct.
The only thing we budgeted for was $1 million. And so we're gonna have to pick up another $3 million in this year's cycle. So the implementation would have to be stretched possibly
to later in the year.
To get there.
Yes.
And here's the other reason why I wanted to set a realistic expectation of no sooner than September. Because of the logistics of workday and some of those things, but because the department head's working, and like Commissioner Lee's talking about with finances, right? But the reality is it will take us time to also go back over the budget and make sure that some of these numbers are correct, and how we can move some of those back. So for me, the other question is, and that's not the question, some of these employees are waiting to see, they haven't seen the study. And so when we talk about back pay, if they're a 0 no change or a 1 change, and they may be some of them that are the most adamant about back pay, when they realize based on that they may be only talking about $150 total in back pay, they may say, well, salary study sucks and I don't care about back pay, but I definitely want it going forward. And that's why I say, so
Sure.
that implementation where they would start to receive that pay in July might help us with the employees understanding exactly what that means, so they can be a part of helping us through this with their department heads. So that to me is important too.
Let me just say also, also beat the drum of full implementation, because full implementation helps with retaining the current employees that we have.
Right.
And also hiring employees, which we've had some difficulties. I do want to say just at the end here that how much I appreciate Lena and Merritt and others that have been participating, department heads and others that have spent a lot of time
Yes.
working on this. And I almost see a giant, almost a miracle here, because Commissioner Lee, when I first started talking to you about the market study, there was very little credibility, I would say, as to the McGrath market study. And I feel like today you're a lot closer to feeling like this. It's a lot better than it was.
Yeah, that was zero credibility
Yes.
because I did not have any information. They gave me nothing.
Well, and
Yeah.
in fairness to your statement toward him, I actually told you no also.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And so all the staff time and working on and auditing and looking at it. By the way, they were using the same database that McGrath was using, and looking through this and really fine tuning, if you will. I think it's been helpful. I think it's helped you to understand. I think it's helped all three of you to understand the market study. Lane and her staff has been involved in market studies a number of times for this county. So I think that's been helpful. And we certainly appreciate the department heads in our meetings that we've had. They've been very helpful. We met one-on-one, and we talked about each position in their departments potentially. We talked about compression issues. We talked about all these issues that were not talked about with McGrath. At least that's the way I felt with my meetings with them. And I felt like the department heads felt like that this was a better process because they had a chance to talk. And they were telling us what positions were difficult to fill and retain, and what positions they felt like were out of whack, and we were focusing in on those ones. And that's what we tried to do, incorporate that help, and I appreciate their help today, so thank you.
Sheriff Tracy, I'd like to address a couple things. One of the things that's been concerning to me is that we're talking about representing our employees to the commission. Part of the issue is that those employees can't tell me how they feel because they haven't seen the numbers. They haven't seen the specifics. People come up and say, well, where am I at in this? I know I've seen the numbers, but we were requested not to give them out, so we haven't. So they can't have an honest discussion with me because each of them may be individually different, whether they're in mid-career, end career, first of the career. But I can't give you feedback on that because they haven't seen specifics as it comes to them. Yeah. So that's a concern to me, to be asked to give input to you when I haven't got input from them. And they can't give it to me until they get something specific that's been proposed that they know about. We know about what's been proposed and talked about within the department heads, the committee, and yourselves and Lena.
So what would be wrong with giving them the information? I don't.
Well,
I mean, I think there could be a few
Well,
adjustments that we have first, but I don't see any reason.
At some point, when you're comfortable, there ought to be something that comes out so that people can say, oh, I see where I am. That would be very helpful.
And that's probably the right way to say it, because when I called and spoke to you specifically
Right.
about this, I think it would be fair to say that you said, yeah, I feel comfortable with that. It will definitely help my department.
Right.
And you expressed the same concerns that have been expressed here. But it needs to be fully implemented, but how are you going to pay for it going forward?
Right.
And so, you know.
That's been the big thing. The other thing about the first study that went forward, the McGrath study, we spent a lot of time with then working with job descriptions too, and this is another part that's critical. What are we paying for what work? We had a lot of concerns about the job descriptions as they previously existed because we weren't comparing apples to oranges. When I talk about a lieutenant, that's a name of a rank, but a lieutenant in the sheriff's office does what a captain does in Provo. So when you go back and you want to compare comparables to see if the wages are right, we can't really compare a lieutenant in Provo to a lieutenant in the sheriff's office. So that was why it was important in the McGrath study to go back through and outline specific duties and get the job descriptions right. Now we can say, okay, when we're comparing work for work, we go to outside entities for comparables, then we compare that work to work, not a position or a title, but what is the work? Because we don't have captains, we have chief deputies. We have lieutenants that do what captains do, and we have sergeants that do what lieutenants do. So that's kind of an issue, because that represents what they put into it as employees for work.
And Sheriff, you're expressing exactly my frustration.
I understand that.
Because I didn't get that information either.
Right.
And I didn't know how we're doing these comparisons, and sometimes it looked like the job titles were being massaged to get to a certain number instead of just saying this is exactly what's being done.
And
Can I add to that too?
Yes.
Because I want to make sure every employee understands this, okay? I'm speaking for me, okay? When that McGrath study came out, the one that the employees saw is not the raw data that actually came back from McGrath. That was manipulated, okay? That's why I struggled with it. And we don't need to go into any reasons why, but that's why I say, so all the employees are like, well, the McGrath study said this. Just trust me when I tell you, and you can, grandma, my emails of grandma, I don't know if that's possible. But
I don't.
If it is, have it.
Yeah,
and you'll see my understanding on why some of these positions, when you may think, oh, I was entitled to 8, and now, the report coming out is 4.
Right.
Well, I'm here to tell you the 4 is probably more accurate than the other, just based on how the county functions.
Right, and my point is that, so we went back through again with Rob and with Lena, recently, to go back through and massage those positions again, to look at, did we get anything wrong? And the ones that I went through with them, we were able to look at things and specifically put in place what I thought was accurate information. So what was just done, and I haven't seen the end report on that, but through that process with Rob, and when he was acting and the one-on-one meetings, I thought represents pretty well what should be there as far as job descriptions and steps. The other thing,
some of them were changed. I mean, we had some that were combined,
Right.
and this one was split. We split them apart because it didn't make sense on the other one that was where they had them combined.
Understand, and we went through and looked at some of those specifics in our department, and we even looked at eliminating some of the different categories, even from like 1s and 2s and 3s and things like that, where it made sense. So we've made some additional changes to that. But again, the employees are not sure where they are through those changes. Finding the existing money within budgets. I think that's something that's going to be extremely hard. Since 2008, we have been, as our budgets have increased, the increase for wages and benefits have come at the expense of operational funds since 2008. And I can show you in our training funds, in our expenditures, as a percentage of wages and personnel versus operational funds, they have continued to decrease. There's always something else you can cut out. We can cut out water. We can just drink what comes out of the tap. Or we can, I'm just going back to your examples. There's something we can cut. But as a entity, we are very much near the very bottom of cutting anything that doesn't result in a diminishment of services. That's just the reality of it. The other issue is with the salary survey and the things that we've done, looking at those numbers, there's still been significant movement in wages in the last 6 months since we reviewed all this stuff. We've had upward movement in wages that have caused us losses of employees. We're losing people to smaller counties now because of pay issues. So that's my concern, is to stop the exodus and try to figure out how to fund adequately and keep people. We're down many people in the jail, as you know, almost 24 positions. And we've losing people to, and are good people, not just persons who are adequate employees. We're losing our best employees to places like Salt Lake. And those are the comparables we need to look at, because that's where we're losing our people. And those people are leaving because they're making as much as $1,000 a month more for the same benefits, wages, and even they're matching what the existing benefits they get in sick leave and vacation to the time of service that they have to try to entice these people to go away. So those are some that are less monetary in nature, but could be looked at to implement to help us keep people in the near future. They're not necessarily money. The only other thing I think is the other issue is that with the workload that's on the back of the employees, this part comes in significantly where we talk about how many county workers we have per 10,000 or per capita. We're at like 17 per 10,000. The next county is at like 25. That represents a huge disparity in workload that comes back on 17 people versus 25 for the same types of work. And we're talking about counties that have 25 or more per 10,000, and these counties are half the size of us, Davis and Weaver. So we have significant numbers of, but name your workload, whether it's investigative investigations or detective caseload or the patrol caseloads that are on the backs of those workers, and they are really at maximum. So it's not only an issue of how many people we can keep, but there are going to be needs for increased numbers of personnel in the county to help this caseload to keep from breaking the spirit and the will of those who are still here. And for all those reasons, I think there's something that needs to be done immediately, and that's to come to a conclusion of what's being offered, get that to the employees, let them look at it and see where they are, and make a decision so we can get feedback that we can give to you. Thank you.
Any additional? Seeing none.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the market study numbers with some variations that we're going to have to work on, and that after we have those variations where we feel comfortable with, that we also send out that information to all the employees so they can see where they're at. And then we continue to work forward on the implementation of the funding.
Is there a second there?
No, well, not from me.
Okay, I think that's gonna probably die from a lack of a second.
I guess I only have one question before my motion. Expressing my concern, Lena, I don't want to do a full implementation knowing that there are a handful of positions. I don't know how to make a motion where I can fully implement knowing that there are some of those positions listed without singling, because I don't want to say names and I don't want to, but I was very blunt, as were other commissioners, to those departments about those people.
And I don't know that it's a position that needs adjusting or fine tuning as the incumbents of the position because of some increases that were made earlier in the year, I guess. And so I think within a day or two, we can agree on which ones those are and just implement with that understanding.
Okay, then
So let me ask a question before you go there. My motion is to accept the numbers so that we can continue to have, and that's the base.
Right.
That's the base that we're going to go off of. With an understanding, and maybe I can put that in the motion if it's needed or necessary, that the full implementation is going to happen on those numbers that we're accepting. But the second part of the equation is we've got to find out where the money's coming from because we don't have it.
Well,
That's the concern, and if we do a full implementation without going through that process, then I don't know how. If we don't do forecasting, if we don't do an understanding, if we don't know where the money's coming from, it doesn't make any sense to me to just say we're doing a full implementation without having the conversation.
And I'm not like I say, I'm not trying to diminish your concerns, but for me, I'm comfortable. Like I say, we're within $80,000 with turnover and stuff like that. That's not a hard number, and by the $80,000, I'm saying the $1 million that was the placeholder. We're within $80,000, and like I say, with turnover, we generally have at least that much in the budget in a year. I do know there's a surplus in the A&C fund that would fully fund it for this year, and that's why I say, and next year. It's beyond that the conversations seriously need to happen, and so for me, the implementation going forward, I'm trying to find a way that the implementation goes forward after we've identified those handful, so that they are. Because they need to remain where they're at. That's why we set them at market.
And second, we haven't even fully closed the books from 2017 yet. We don't even know where we're at. We're making assumptions on without having that conversation on the financial side.
Well, I did
It's-
have that conversation with Deneen, and you're right. She did say, well, I'm not entirely there. But what I've learned in my 4 years of knowing Deneen, her guess is about as accurate as most people's conclusions. She's very good. And so that's for me where I have that comfort level.
Yeah.
And I did personally have that conversation. So,
Well, and I've had that conversations with her too. I'm just, the concern is that we
Sure.
haven't had the conversation, even the back pay conversation.
Well,
I
and
don't
that's
know
the
what
part-
a-
that's
I don't
the
know
part
what
for
a
me that has
full-
to-
I don't know what a full implementation means if we haven't even looked at I just can't, how do you?
well, so
vote
that's what I'm
for-
going to try and do in my motion. Let's see if we can address some of these things. So,
Commissioner,
yes.
before you make that, can we just clarify that the people you're talking about, that the adjustments you're talking about being made, are those that were previously jump-started within the last
No.
little bit? That's not including
No.
those?
no,
Okay.
these were all adjustments. One is a jump start.
Okay, one of the
that
jump-start.
that Lane is
There was
familiar with
desk
because we
audits
dealt
that
with
were
that a
done.
few weeks ago.
Okay, and then the audits that were, or the provision under C5 of our pay
We
plan,
moved some.
which moves people.
Yes, we moved some in one particular office that I'm thinking of, that we moved them steps because of things that we did a desk audit, if you will.
And we implemented, essentially implemented the
We-
study for them.
We
early.
implemented their market study pay in order to retain good employees, knowing that once this was implemented, they were retaining that step and they would fit in. Okay?
So are we looking at trying to implement the compensation study with the noted adjustments with or contingent upon authorized funding?
Well, so I'm gonna make a motion that I hopefully will
Sure,
clarify that.
That's the question.
So-
I mean, I think we're talking the same stuff. It's just a
And that's,
matter of.
I think we're all actually
Yeah.
talking the same thing. We're saying we all three want to implement this study. The question is how are we finding the funding?
Right.
And we'd also need direction on when you want us to start.
Right, so that's what I'm going to try and do here. So I'm gonna move that we approve and authorize the funding and implementation of the compensation study with the committee's results and recommendations, effective pay period 15, after the commission has reviewed the adjusted salaries that have been previously placed on market and adjusted that for the compensation study, and that this study is released to the employees. How long do you need to make sure it's secure? With
For sure
redacting
this
the
week, we can do
appropriate
it
names?
maybe Thursday.
By Thursday, close of
Friday at
business.
the latest, but hopefully Thursday. Mhm.
Hopefully Thursday, because a couple of us will be gone.
By Thursday, close of business, that's,
Maybe even, well, we'll say Thursday.
well, if I need
So-
to say Friday at noon, I will amend it to Friday at noon.
Um,
I want it to the employees this
I think
week.
we're talking about one hand worth of people, possibly up, you know,
Right?
5 to
Yes,
10, but we're
I
not
can only
talking
think
about a
of 4
lot, so-
individuals.
Okay,
Hey, so
yeah,
I-
that should be
So the only
possible.
difference, I think, in that is that the implementation starts with the monies that we have right now.
Yes.
But how do we have the discussion? So what implementation are we starting? Are we saying, because if you start this thing without knowing how, are we doing back pay?
Well, and that's why I said, for
Are we
me,
not doing back pay?
the implementation's starting. So right now, the back pay, and that's why I was trying to be very clear to the employees, with department heads and everything, that discussion's probably gonna take the next 2 or 3 months to identify funding and see if it's there and have that open and conversation. But so that the employees, and so we don't continue to keep losing people, and so that we can refill the positions that are essential to the county's government. That's why I'm
So
making.
we're
the
having,
motion.
so we're starting it, and I don't have a problem with the start of it, you know, as soon as possible, so we stop the bleeding part of it.
Which the reason the
is,
20th is the soonest I was told we could.
Right?
So
But my biggest concern is the conversation afterwards, because if all of a sudden it started and it's implemented, and we say, there it is, and now we accept it, where do we go with the conversation?
So what if we split this into 2 segments? We approve and authorize, we approve and accept, probably might be the better term, the results of the compensation study with a commitment for implementation, but can we table the implementation part for a week to identify the long-term funding sources?
You can, I
Can
would
you-
just
can you
say
s-
that
Can you split that?
this would probably be the last day that we could have it authorized and start at pay period 15, so a delay would probably cause
Another pay period.
one pay
Because there would be
period
2
delay.
weeks later of implementation.
Right. So, I mean, it shouldn't take.
The real only funding question is the back pay and that situation for this year.
Right, I think
Yes,
if,
and, well, that and also, where this money comes from in the future, for the future.
That's what I mean.
Right.
And in the future, and for me, the reason I can get there is because, again, the increases in the 2018 fund and collection, just based on those, plus based on regular budgeting, but that's why I said, I threw that caveat out there, the department heads are gonna, and I hear the sheriff's concerns, I understand.
They don't know what that means. And I don't know what that means. I'm not saying that I have any plan on what that means.
I can tell you exactly what that means. I'll tell you, real world experience for the sheriff's department. Don't you dare even bring me new motorcycles, because that kind of things, I can go through every department and tell you what that means to me. Now you don't, and you guys are very good with your money, so I don't want to single you out. But since you spoke, I can tell Jeff Buman what that means. For me, and I'm saying for me, but.
well, if we can get authorization to start implementation with the $1 million that you set aside and so on, and then have a future discussion about whether there's any adjustment for back pay or some equivalent to it, then, like you say, I think that would stop the bleeding or help us move forward and not
And it gives us the time
have
to
the
work through the other
question still
details.
So maybe if I
Yeah.
amend my motion to also include what I previously stated and a commitment to review back pay with an answer by September 30th. That way we've identified funding and everything.
And then we'll continue the discussions into the next budget cycle.
Absolutely. They have to be.
I mean, we've always, well, I won't go there. But I can get on board with that. I'll second that.
Okay. I'm going to try repeat that one. And I'm not sure I'll succeed. So I have a motion to approve and authorize the funding and implementation of the compensation study committee's results and recommendations for effective pay period 15 with a note for review of back pay to be completed by September, with an additional note of the finalization of positions that may be out of balance currently on the system, with those to be released by Friday, no later than 4:30 to the employees.
Works.
Close?
Hey.
Okay. We have that motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That will carry 3-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again. That
Lena,
was a
just
big
a
one.
note, some of us are going out of town Thursday. So we have to get together soon.
So with that note, can I make a plea with the employees? When that list comes out to you, it's not that the commission doesn't want to hear, and again, I'll speak for myself, but please start with your department heads, and let's try that route so that we have a direct, or your supervisor, because in the sheriff's case, being the department head is many, many people, so whether it's sergeants, lieutenants, whatever, if we can go through that way we can have more of an orderly discussion that works better.
You just asked, do you want it disseminated through the department head or just an
Sure.
email to
Yes,
everyone?
I would prefer it disseminated through the department head. Okay,
Okay.
we're on to setting our closed meetings.
I will move that we strike regular agendas items 7 and 8.
Second?
Motion and a second to strike regular agenda items 7 and 8. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion will carry 3-0.
I will move that we approve and set a date, time, and location for a closed meeting to discuss the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual or individuals for today's date of this location upon completion of the regular agenda.
Second?
A motion and a second to approve regular agenda item number 9. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye will carry 3-0.
Move that we approve and set a date, time, and location for a closed meeting for a strategy session to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation for today's date at this location following completion of regular agenda items.
Second?
I have a motion and a second for regular agenda item number 10. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion will carry 3-0. There were no work session items submitted. Any general public comments? Seeing none, we'll move into our closed sessions, and thank you for your participation today.